Hi, everybody. I think, don't know, Joe, if we've got people joining, but I see the participant numbers sort of steadied a little. I think I'll just kick off if that's okay. Welcome, everybody. It's lovely to see you, especially at this time of year when I know there's a lot of busyness in offices. So it's excellent that you've made it to this session, which is the Q&A session associated with the next round of the RIAS Awards for 2025. It does feel as if this has come around really quite quickly because we've just recently been celebrating the Doolan Award, but it's really a mark of the fact that throughout the year we're basically involved in awards throughout Scotland, through the chapters, through the national awards, which this is all about, and also through Doolan. Shortly, Joe from the RIAS is going to be talking you through the awards process. But before that, I'm delighted that we're joined today by Edward Farleigh of fardaa Architecture. He's going to, hi Edward. He's going to tell us a bit about his experience of applying for the awards, and also a little bit about his award-winning building, Croft 3 on the Isle of Mull. I'm told that one of the highlights, I wasn't on this judging panel, but one of the highlights was the stress associated with getting to Mull and getting on the ferry in time, having had a pretty busy schedule in the Central Belt. But the judges were not put off. They still were delighted to see Croft 3, and it became one of our RIAS Award winners. It then went on to be one of the RIBA award winners in the Reinvention Award. It's a truly beautiful building. The judges themselves, I'll maybe read from their citation, and this is a great shot to give you that. It was once a ruined croft building, but it was being repurposed and extended as a restaurant. They felt that it retained the croft's intimate and simple character, but harnessed the awesome surrounding landscape and views. Together, the old and the new elements demonstrated deep understanding of the nature of the ruin and its setting. The jury enjoyed the interwoven themes of food, friendship, and community, and how these combine in a modest, unique, and delightful space on a shoestring budget. So it's truly a sensitive but inspiring building. Congratulations on that, Edward. But I'd like to pass over to you now to hear a little bit about the story of the project, but also how you felt the awards process went. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everybody. I can't see any faces or anything. I've forgotten how terrifying doing a Zoom meeting with lots of people is. So do somebody alert me if anything's going wrong. My face is half out of the camera. So yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about the project, because obviously mainly really people are on here to get an understanding of the process and how I suppose we managed to successfully navigate that process. But I'll just mention, I mean, it's really been introduced already, but it's you can see the building in the sort of lower left there, and this incredible setting on Mull. You can see Benmore in the distance there, and Loch Tuath in between, which is the sea loch, and the lower island to the right, which looks like it's part of the landmass, is Ulva. So we're looking across this beautiful smaller island within the bay of an island, with all the conditions sort of perfect. You know, the roads on the north, so the access comes in the right way, the view. The building is obviously on the right side of that road, so you've just got the view. You really can't see anything else from the restaurant. You get this wonderful ray of light coming through behind the mountains originally, and then in the evening when most people come in the summer, you get this kind of cross light across these wonderful ridges and cliffs that you can sort of see to the in the distance there. It was a ruined byre. You can see sort of two volumes just about there. There's the larger volume, which is or the wider volume in the foreground is the extension, and the sort of more upright volume behind it is the ruined byre that we converted. And the client had started a restaurant down the road, further just out of view there actually. Years before, as a single mum with no training, no family money or anything, just out of her own a lean-to in her own house as a way of just making ends meet, but it completely took off. And then over the years, she'd been walking past this ruin and thinking, what a wonderful spot for a restaurant. So she bought it. I've been friends with her for many, many years. I did an initial study for her, and then we went from there. Budget was pretty low. It's about 300,000, but that included creating a new access, bringing electric to the site, commercial kitchen, so all sorts of things. So in reality, in a way, for the building, the budget's around about sort of 250 or something like that for a 100 square metre building, working with stone. So that's we didn't have a lot to spare. We put a restaurant in the dining room in the large stone volume, and then the extension housed all the secondary elements. And I suppose one of the main interventions the main space was adding these kind of 4 low, very deep windows. And you can see it from the way you approach from the road. You can see one of the new windows there, which is sort of set flush with the outer face to distinguish them from the original windows, but also to sort of give this slightly otherworldly feel, in the sense, I suppose, that there's something going on there, and there's although it's an existing building, but there's some kind of architecture happening, if you like, and then you can see the extension overlapping behind, which creates a bit of a sheltered entrance for the restaurant. So maybe I'll move straight on to the awards, really, to talk about how that process went for us, because probably really what people are here for. So I suppose sort of some general considerations. We'd already published the project before we went to the awards, and so I had a sort of inkling, really. Well, I mean, obviously I quite like the project anyway, but also had an inkling that there was a sort of there was an appetite for it, I suppose, because it got fairly good reception in the press. We had also been shortlisted for a couple of other awards, but probably had already entered the RIAS Award by the time we got those shortlistings. But the AR New Into World Award and quite up 2 others. So I knew that I guess we were kind of getting considered. And I suppose what's really wonderful about the RIBA Awards, and to some degree the RIAS and the RIBA and the Civic Trust Awards, is that it's not just one award. So you've got a good rate of return. You've got a much better chance of getting that award. And I think also, of course, they're known by clients. Those organisations are known by clients, and so I suppose the value, especially if you're already an RIAS or RIBA member, is pretty good compared to the cost of some of the other awards and the likelihood of winning them. So I suppose you're sort of gauging the quality of the project and whether you think it's got a chance in awards in general. And I suppose we felt we did. And I think part of the reason for that was the architecture, obviously, but also we would know it's this wonderful site. We know it's the ruined structure is charming, and also the story of the project was attractive. And of course, that's actually not technically part of the judging criteria, but it's still part of the appeal of a project, I think. And the fact, I suppose, that it has some kind of community value in a way, even though it's not a sort of a formal community project. It's supporting a rural community. So I suppose playing into that is important, I suppose, in this process, making sure that you're kind of almost like when you're writing a dissertation or something, that you have an introduction, your main body, and your conclusion. And each one of those, you mention these things which you think are the big selling points of the project. Then obviously there's photography, which we obviously had already before we started applying to the awards. But thinking about when you're doing that photography, obviously you want to think about the audience you're utilising for. Is it just for sort of domestic clients? They might have a different, eye and a different interest. Is it purely for architects, or is it a mix of sort of architects and sort of other professionals or people sort of associated with architecture? Not all 3 of those groups, I suppose, have slightly different interests in what you're trying to show. So you may want to sort of, obviously, I'm sure many of you do this anyway, but you may want to be asking the photographer to take certain types of photographs that you can then select from and use in different ways for different kind of purposes. So, you know, you're sending it to a consumer magazine, then you might use slightly different photos than the ones you're sending for judgment by architects. Similar with the drawings, I suppose, and of course drawings don't typically feature in consumer focused publications and other things, but again, if this is not obvious, talking to architects and making sure the drawings illustrate the strengths of the project in your eyes. And I think most importantly, probably, well, not most importantly, but extremely importantly, is making sure you're going through the judging criteria. And just as you would with any kind of bid for work or whatever it is, making sure that those keywords that they mention are just sort of quite dumbly put into your text, as long as they're the, you know, as long as there's a kind of it justified in what you're saying, making sure those words are simply mentioned in at some point in the text, because there will be a certain degree with any kind of judging that it needs to be justified, it needs to be shown to be, you know, meeting certain key criteria, and if those are just said in the text, well, this meets this one, this meets this one. It doesn't have to be that literal, but I think the key words themselves almost all have to be in there somewhere. You need to sort of incorporate them into the way you're writing about the project. I'll probably move on to the visit then, actually, but I just wondered, maybe we want to pause just in case either Karen or anyone in the room has any questions about any of that.
I think if we have any questions, I should say, please put them in the chat, if that's okay.
Okay.
See, there's a Q&A box. Apologies, I'm causing confusion. Here we go.
Okay. So how did you approach entering the awards with the client? Yeah, that wasn't a problem. I mean, I don't know that it typically is. I mean, you may have had different experience, but I mean, nowadays, I didn't do this with this project because I was fairly new to having my own practice. So, but I think nowadays I would broach it right at the beginning of the project, almost with the appointment as well, to say we would like to get photography of the project and we'd like to be able to enter into awards. I mean, I've not really heard of people. I mean, maybe people have. I've not really heard of people saying they don't want to enter for awards. They often want the budget and maybe their names to be anonymous, but typically people are pretty proud anyway. So they want I mean, in this case, it's a business as well. So I should say that all the publishing and the awards have done a huge amount of good. I mean, I should say they run it really well, and they've got some brilliant. They do their own promotion really well. But the success of the building and with architects and with awards has been a big benefit to them as well. Obviously, it's slightly different with a private house, I would say. But again, I think most people are quite proud. They want to show off their house to some degree. So I'm not sure you get too many problems with that, really.
Yeah.
Any others?
Yep. Oh, yeah, there's another one come in.
Can you choose more categories, or would you stick with one? Well, I mean, you get the special categories, and obviously we did enter those because. Do you mean because I think they're done by cost, aren't they? So I don't think you can necessarily the actual RIAS categories are all by cost, aren't they? Am I right?
Yeah, when you buy your submission, you sort of buy your submission based on how much the project was.
So there's no distinction there. In other awards, obviously, you will have that. And yes, if I feel that there's I mean, there's usually an extra fee. So it's about, not in the RIAS and RIBA awards. So maybe I shouldn't talk about the other awards too much. But in this case, obviously, you can tick at the end about whether you want to enter special awards. And I have to say, I did that quite, thought like, well, I might as well, you know, but I have to say, I've taken this year entering into the awards season. I've been a bit more proactive about making sure I am in for any of the awards that I can justify. Because there's no, with these awards, obviously, there's no extra fee. So it's, I think, just a few hundred extra words you've got to do, isn't it? I think, if I remember correctly. So as long as you've got the time to do that, and I think it makes sense. I mean, there's probably only usually one or two of them that you can actually enter due to the nature of whatever project it is you're entering. Okay. Have I still got everyone? It's gone very quiet. Yeah, okay, just checking. I haven't lost my... Okay, so maybe I will, and then we have more questions anyway, but maybe I'm talking about the visit. So I think it's a really little credit actually to the RIAS and RIBA awards that they do visits, and they do visits for every one of the awards. So if you get shortlisted for any of the national awards as well, they'll do visits for that with separate judges. Now it's quite hard for some. Well, for me, it's quite a long way to the Isle of Mull. So that has some logistical issues, but I think it's just great that it's actually judged on the architecture and not just on your images and description. Obviously those have a huge influence, and they certainly will obviously be what your shortlisting is based on. But the visits themselves are kind of crucial then to whether you get the award. Is that those are the people who will decide in the end once you're on the shortlist.
I think it's really, to me, it's absolutely vital that we get to visit the buildings in the shortlisted one. And, it is difficult in Scotland because we are very fortunate. We've got some really great architects working on, everywhere across our Northern and Western Isles and on the mainland to the borders. But it is the thing where you get the feel for the building. And I would encourage anyone who does enter to take that into account, that hopefully we'll be coming to see it in the shortlisting, or rather once they're shortlisted.
There's another question coming, but I'll come back to questions in a second. I'll just finish this bit on the visits, and then come back to the rest of the questions. But if you will keep putting them in, that'd be great. So the judges, so then obviously if you get shortlisted, then they'll arrange with you a date for a visit, and you'll be told, if I remember correctly, you are told quite far in advance who the judges are going to be. Is that correct? If I remember correctly, Karen?
So our judging panel for this year will be sort of released on social media in the upcoming weeks.
Okay, so it'll be long in advance, So you can obviously do a bit of research on them, and I mean, I wouldn't get too much into this because I think you can easily get a bit nervous. Then, I've got to tell them about this because if they have something they want to ask you, they'll ask you about it anyway. But it's still good to know who they are, obviously, and be able to then address them by their name when they come. And I think I didn't over-prepare the visit, partly because the way I personally am, I respond much better to people talking to me and asking me questions than I do preparing kind of some kind of prepared talk. But I think it is quite important to have a short introduction. That you're making sure that you're hitting the sort of the 3, 4, 5 key things you want to mention about it. And the rest of it will probably come up in the discussion, so it's an hour long, if I remember correctly. So there's plenty of time. I mean, it depends on the scale of your project, obviously. Ours was pretty small, so we had plenty of time to talk about everything, really. And then I think, make sure you're guiding the judges in the route you want them to take, and, taking them in the through a process of entering the building or seeing it from the landscape or the street, in the order that you think is preferable. Where do you want them to come into the room? Where do you want them to, you can control that to some degree. Again, I wouldn't overthink it because it won't go to plan, but at least you have a thought, well, we're going to start up there, we'll walk around the side, and then we'll come into the main entrance, then through the hall or whatever it is. I think that's quite important. Right, so there's a few more questions here, isn't there? What were your project's USPs and how did this inform your submission? So I guess some of those things were outside of our design, and I think that's fine. The views and the use of the project were very seductive, but making sure, I suppose, the the thing that we feel we did quite well was to take advantage of that setting, both in terms of view and the massing, and also to create a space that we felt reflected the social atmosphere of the previous restaurant, which was a sort of very compromised building, but brought people very close together, and as a result made people feel very connected to it and connected to each other. So building on those things in terms of the way we controlled the way light entered the building, the way people sat together, very narrow, long tables. Here in this image there, it's turned sideways. They're often the other way, actually, so that people will sort of sit in long rows, sitting with people they don't necessarily know. So we discussed a lot of those ideas. They discussed, I suppose, the idea of doing a lot with a little, and the fact that the budget was low, but we made a virtue of that, you know, using very simple white wood for the beams, and doubling up the hardwood ply as a form of purlin, so that we were reducing structure. We talked about how we engineered out the retaining structures, or designed out the retaining structures for the track, which saved a huge amount of embodied carbon in concrete and block wall. Yeah, so I think those are the key things we talked about. I mean, there's many things we of course, you were trying to touch on everything, but prioritizing the things that you think are the most important considerations, and making sure those are even mentioned a couple of times is quite important, I think. Did you prepare for the judge's visit? So, and did the client join? Well, we sort of mentioned that bit, but the clients, it's up to them. Generally, it's preferable, I suppose. It depends in the instance. I mean, in this case, Jeanette, the owner of the restaurant, is incredibly charming and disarming, and I think, and people respond very well to her. So I thought it was quite important to have her in. Actually, if I remember correctly now, she didn't really engage as I'd hoped she would in the instance. So in some ways, one of the things I thought was that I should have prepped her a bit better. Not to say it's necessarily anything in particular, but just to say it's important that we have a discussion with them, and, you know, kind of that she engages fully with the sort of process, because I didn't want it to feel as if it was just me that's responsible for the project, which it obviously isn't, or that I felt it was just my project. You know, certainly she was such a huge part of it. But yeah, I think it probably depends on they can do, basically, and it's up to you whether you think it's going to help or not. Have you used the award in publicity material for practice to promote new clients? Yeah, I have, but I'd say actually, so for domestic clients, for example, they probably found it more in publications, but then having the awards is really useful for getting people over the line, I think, particularly with the RIBA Reinvention Award we won, which is obviously the national award. And, you know, I mean, of course, there's loads of wonderful refurbished projects around the UK. So, although I wouldn't claim personally that to other architects that it's the best renovation project in the country, you know, to clients, like, I can say that it's a way of convincing them to come, you know, to come to us. So I think that's probably where it's most important, that once people do come to you, you know, and you put it in your email chain, for example, so that everyone you're emailing knows this happened, not in a super blatant way, but just so that people are aware of, I suppose, the pedigree of what you're doing. Yeah, I haven't sort of necessarily, and yeah, we'd use it on Instagram and things like that, but I haven't put it in an advert per se, if you like. But yeah, we use it as much as we can. And I suppose there's a sort of half-life to these things, really. You know, you've probably got 1 year to 2 years to make the most of them, and then you need to be getting some more awards. Otherwise, it looks like, you know, it's a bit like One Britain in, when people had a sign saying One Britain in Bloom 2002. You think, what happened since then? But how many are typically shortlisted? I don't know. It varies every year, doesn't it, as I understand?
So, for example, for 2024, we had 56 entries and we had 17 shortlisted. So again, it just sort of can depend, and it can maybe depend on if the judges really like a lot of projects, and they might just decide to go and visit them all rather than trying to cut it back more.
I mean, from my perspective, I went back when we were looking at going up to the judges visit. I'd seen that looking back over the years, roughly half of the shortlist get an award, and when it's not exactly, and they don't clearly, they just give as many as they think are needed. But that gave me a pretty good indication, and I suppose, of the importance of the judges visit. Then, you know, I suppose entering the awards is a fairly low risk thing. You know, it's a bit of a cost and it's some of your time. But then the shortlisting, you've got to invest a bit more time in planning, maybe, because the odds are much better anyway. You know, you've got close to or better than a 50-50 chance, perhaps in some cases this year anyway. I think more than half of the shortlist won the award. We've got another one here. So sketches from the original concept be included to show any variation from the final project. I mean, I think it depends if your process is a very important part of your. I'm not sure what the capacity for entering them is, but in general, for entering these things, I always think that it depends on whether you feel that the process is an important part of the story or sells the story. I mean, because of course there's always a process to architecture. So what you include in terms of your drawings and any kind of idea about iteration, I suspect you should probably include it if it's if there's, like, you know, for example, if there's a lot of community involvement in the process. That will also be quite an important thing to discuss. Yeah. The image to show the space unoccupied. Yeah, that was unfortunate because we went. It was completed just before the close of the season, and then the only time I could go up with the photographer was it wasn't going to open again for. We went up before the leaves fell, but that meant it was still after the season. So I would have much preferred to have it photographed inhabited, and I'm hoping to get some soon. Actually, I think it's definitely a positive addition if you can. I mean, we just put a house we've done into the English RIAS Awards, and we included some images of occupied images in that. I think, yeah, but again, it really depends on the project. This is obviously a project about people, so I would have preferred that we did get it full for Burns Night or something, but that wasn't going to be, you know, I knew that couldn't happen. Similar with the landscape. I mean, in some ways it's good to wait until you can get the landscape bedded in, and again, we couldn't really do that, so I had to be a bit more mindful about what I was showing in the photography and to deal with a very raw landscape at this point we shot it.
Thank you very much.
But just to add, Karen, did you want to say something?
No, carry on.
I was just going to add, because you said about how did you get across the atmosphere of the space. So I mean, I sort of included kind of little stories about the way it works and the way people sit together in the previous restaurant, and so it's implied that was still kind of happening here, which it is. And similarly, talked about the way the client is in our application. Because again, I think you kind of try and be quite evocative. Even if it's architects, they don't want to necessarily read this really cold description of what you've done. You know, it's certainly going to feel more appealing if you talk about the atmosphere and the kind of impact on people's lives, the benefits to people's lives that are using it. As long as it, again, as with all these things, it's got to ring true. I think you can't say something that's just really not the case about the project. But if it's there, you've got to play it up, I think. And I certainly would do that with photography if I could in this project, and certainly if not, then I think we've got to write about it as much as we can. Yeah.
I was just going to say that, you know, the narrative of the application gives you an opportunity to outline the brief, but outline how you responded to the brief and how you added to it in your approach, and you know, basically gave more to it. Yeah, I think unless there's any other reflections, Edward,
no.
I'd just like thank you. What I picked up, and maybe just for the audience, I'm not sure who's out there, but I know that it's incredibly investing going in for an award, especially if it's not something you do a lot, because you're sort of putting your work out there for everyone to judge. And so I thought it was quite interesting when you talked about being relatively confident when you actually applied because of other publications. But it's just you know, to underline that it is a positive process, and you know, be a bit confident if you think the work is good enough. You know, it's to tell that story, because at the end of the day, I think the other aspect of confidence that you talked about was the confidence it gives clients if you have an award. And so that's the, you know, the positive for that, putting yourself out there in itself. So I think, you know, again, younger practices, to my mind, it's a really, really good thing to do, because, you know, it gives you, you know, some profile. And for other practices, you know, it's about celebrating good work, continual good work. And it's always, I've got to confess, whilst the judging panels that I've been on, whilst it's always about exemplary buildings and exemplary architecture, you know, there's so many things that come to the judges when they're actually on the day looking at the buildings. And sometimes it's the thing that you didn't necessarily think about, the social purpose perhaps, or something that actually pushes, you know, a very good building ahead of another very good building. So it's these things, so making sure you really have told the story and you've ticked as many good boxes as you can.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's really wonderful. It is, the judging visits are really enjoyable, actually, I think, in a way. I mean, obviously there's a bit of stress, but I mean, I also feel that when you finish a building, well, one, it's never finished, and two, there's a bit of an anticlimax and a lack of closure. And I think, you know, along with taking a photographer there, I think if you do get to go with judges or a reviewer or something, you know, it does. I find it's really lovely to be able to talk about all these things that you've been slaving away on for 2, even 3 years. And to think, oh yeah, I did all this, you know, we did all this, you know? And it's really good, you know. So it is actually a really uplifting experience, I think, and even just entering, as you say, it's great to be able to sort of crystallize what it is you think about what it is you're doing, and to reflect. You know.
Yep. Thank you. So we're now going to turn over to Jo, who's going to tell us a wee bit about the awards application process, and she'll be able to answer any of the other questions that come up. And of course, Edward and I can too, if it's particularly about judge or judgy. Thank you.
Just click through. Yeah, I'm just going to quickly run through sort of our timeline and a little bit into the entry form, and if you've got any questions ahead of our closing date is the 10th of January. So if people are starting to think about it over sort of Christmas holidays, sort of it'll come in very quickly. So as you, I'm sure, are aware, our entries opened in October, and then closing in January, and then that sort of leads on to the initial shortlisting, and that will take place in March, and then the winners are announced in May. So the sort of entry process for the awards is that you have to buy your submission on the RIAS Awards website. That is, as we mentioned at the start, sort of based on your cost, your construction cost. So it's all split into categories in that way, and sort of price sort of increases as you sort of go up the levels. Once you have bought that then gives you access to the Airtable link, which is where we ask you to submit all your information. If you want to have a look at where, or like what is actually required of your submission, you can look at it on our website. But in order to see the form, you actually need to buy your entry, and it's that same link. So if you buy one entry, if you buy 5 entries, it's that one link that you use for all of them. It'll just work again after you've submitted one. Our advice is that you use a Word document. When you're compiling all your information, there's no way to to save your form on the Airtable. So our advice is to use our Word document and fill out all your project descriptions, your additional text, and then just have that all sitting ready to go. The same with all your images and your video links and your drawings. Have them all sitting ready to go so that you've compiled everything before you then go into the Airtable form. Just purely because of the fact you can't save it, so we don't want anyone sort of wasting time filling it out halfway and then not able to sort of fully submit it. There's also, if you'll see it in the entry form and our website, there's mandatory sustainability criteria for the RIBA National Awards. So just take note of anything that says that you have to be eligible or you have to have submitted this for the Stirling, just because otherwise, if you don't and you then are a winner, that's you then shortlisted for or sort of put forward for the national awards. So it's then we would have to do their chase year. So just sort of bear that in mind when you're submitting it, that if you don't put that in, it might mean we have to come back to you later if you get sort of put forward to the national awards. Also, please pay attention to any of the special award categories. The project, architect and the client of the year award, this year we've sort of asked if you would please submit the extra text, just obviously for if you think your 400-word project description, that'll probably be on your project. So in terms of the project architect award, we want to hear about why your project architect should win. We want that extra text just to sort of help the judges, and it means that it doesn't have to take up any extra space within your project description. And then final step, obviously submit your entry, and then you'll hear back from us sort of end of January, and shortlisting visits will be sort of mid-March, and that will be in your email to say that you've been shortlisted, and we'll confirm dates and sort of ask you to hold that whole week, because then it's a case of sort of juggling ferries and transport back and forth to sort of work out what we're going around Scotland. Sort of top tips are just to make sure you take your time and make sure your entry has a clear narrative, which I think Edward sort of did a really good job at describing earlier. Just making sure that you sort of sell your project story. Choosing your high quality images and your building angles. Again, the shortlisting process in January, it's just pictures that we can see. So the better understanding the judges can get of your building from the pictures, the better basically. And there is also an extra box that you can upload extra images that won't be used for press. So for example, in the 2024 entries, if your private sort of residential client doesn't want to be in the photos, or maybe has like particular parts of their house that they don't want to be used in any press, that's sort of your opportunity to upload them, so the judges can still see and still get a full understanding of the building, but your clients may be a bit happier that their laundry room isn't going to be shown on social media or anything. Sustainability, as I have mentioned, just make sure and try and include all the information you can. This is especially important going forward to the national awards for the RIBA Reinvention Award and Stirling Prizers, the upfront carbon and the embodied carbon, that are all sort of mandatory. So as much as we don't ask you, or like it's not mandatory for our awards, but if you do want to go the extra step and potentially get a national award, just please bear that in mind. We also sort of general feedback is always, or ask for feedback from your practice or for someone else, just to make sure that somebody that hasn't ever or doesn't have the full sort of in detail understanding of your project can understand it. Again, think of the judges that they've no knowledge at all, so just to make sure that it's super clear. We also have 7 special category awards available this year. That's them listed, and just as I've already mentioned, please take note of the additional 150-word text box within the entry form. So the general project description is only 400 words to tie in with the RIBA this year. So we have added that extra text box so that you've got multiple opportunities to go further into how you've used timber, how you've used, how you've done the interiors particularly well. So as much as the project description is limited to 400 words, that's multiple more 150 words that you can add in different opportunities to just expand that a wee bit further. And yeah, just to reiterate, 10th of January at 5 PM is the deadline. So yeah, happy Christmas holidays, potentially writing some project descriptions, or I'm sure you can get around to it the first week after we're back. But yeah, if you've got any questions, I will try my best to answer them, and if I can't, I can get in touch over email with anything a wee bit more detailed.
Doesn't look as if there's any particular question coming up, Joe. You obviously covered it all very clearly. Presumably people can email if there's any questions that come up in the course of it, but what I'm taking from it is to get organised in advance to use the Airlink table and have a clear group of photos and a clear text in a Word document, and that, you know, having that offline before you load it up.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like Edward covered quite a lot about the sort of way to approach your description and selling your story. I think that was all really useful stuff, which is really great. And yeah, if there's
is that one question? I think that's a question.
Yeah, so we ask for the sorry, I'll just read it out for people that can't see it. Can I just confirm that to be eligible, the scheme must have been occupied by January 2024? So yeah, this also comes from the RIBA. Your project must have been occupied for 1 year prior to the closing. So because our project's closed for submission in January 25, your project must have been occupied for a full year prior to this. I think if anyone's swaying over whether they're eligible, I think a year goes by so quickly. So if you think in the fact that it's actually only 10 months until the 2026 entries would actually be opening. So as much as you're like, oh, well, it's complete now, I would quite like to just submit it. It's only an extra 10 months. And I think making sure it's occupied for that full year really allows it to sort of bed into the surroundings a wee bit more. If you think landscaping, it's been occupied, so you maybe understand a wee bit better about how it actually functions in order to tell a story a bit more. So I think, yeah, that sort of year is quite important, and it also ties in with the RIBA requirements as well. So yeah, that's important to enter too.
We're getting another one. When will you know in March the visits might be? My project is in Mull too. How much notice is likely?
So I will actually just give the week. So we will probably be in contact before the end of January, and then the week that is blocked out is the 17th of March. That sort of whole week, we tend to ask practices to just block that out immediately, because then it is so transport ferry dependent, like when suits for us to sort of get back and forth from islands. So we would hope that we'd then be maybe in touch in like a week or 2 weeks after to confirm what day you would be. But we do ask you to sort of block that entire week out just while we start to map out how we're getting around.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Nope. Okay, so I think it just behoves me to say thank you very much, Edward. That was fantastic. It was so good to get your perspective of entering and to hear a bit about Croft 3. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
And congrats with all the other future awards entries. We hope you might have some more in Scotland.
Yeah, couple. Yeah.
Great, excellent. And thanks so much, Joe, for taking us through all the top tips as well as the admin of it. So thanks for all your work in coordinating it all, because at the end of the day, it definitely is you that organises everyone. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming, and hopefully it's been a useful session. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.